So next up, podcast listeners, AOC wants to expel everyone. Everyone. AOC wants to expel everyone from Congress. So Chris Cuomo of CNN asks AOC, what if the Senate delays the Trump impeachment? What if the Senate delays it? It's not like right away, like the way the House did it, where the House didn't have any kind of findings of fact or any kind of hearings about Donald Trump and what they called the insurrection, and that fact that, as they see it, Donald Trump was completely and utterly responsible for it. Of course, again, the House of Representatives just decided to impeach him, but AOC wants the Senate to do the same thing. They want to what? Remove him from office? He's no longer in office. But nonetheless, Chris Cuomo asks AOC the question, what happens if the Senate of the United States decides to delay the trial of Donald Trump? We have that clip, and here it is.
Hey, if they want to delay it, let's bring up a vote to expel Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley from the Senate.
You think they should be out?
Because if we've got time on our hands, then we should be actually bringing justice to the members of Congress and the members of the Senate who also help support this insurrection.
You think they should be out?
Let's not. They absolutely, if they don't resign, they should be expelled.
Zero chance they resign. Nobody resigns.
Then we should hold the vote.
So AOC says Josh Hawley and Senator Ted Cruz, two United States senators, should resign because they happen to be objectors in the United States Senate. So, she wants to just expel everyone from Congress. And if that's not enough, the Chris Cuomo also asked her, well, how about in the House of Representatives? You told us who you want to expel in the Senate, but how about in the House? Do tell. We have that clip, and here it is.
I know we have an ethics inquiry coming up in the House. If an investigation bears out that Representatives Mo Brooks or representatives, for example, other representatives that were there that day, were in fact collaborating with these insurrectionists that led to the deaths of 5 people, they have no place in the House of Representatives either.
What about just voting to decertify the election on the basis of polls or what they had heard may have happened?
Well, I think that there should be consequences for attempting to overturn our elections. And these investigations are bearing out, and we will see to the full extent what we know from the facts of it. But there are other consequences as well. People often say that the House is about relationships. And when Democrats have a majority, there's also the question of, even if members don't get expelled, do you really want to co-sponsor legislation with a member who doesn't even believe in the veracity of their own election?
So AOC, of course, wants to have members of the House of Representatives who have objected to the certifying of elections in certain states, not all states. She wants to have them expelled, or she wants members who are Democrats to not even work with them whatsoever. So in other words, isolate them so they can't get anything done, which is what Democrats do anyway when they're in charge of the House of Representatives. It's not like the Republicans have any kind of power whatsoever, because the Democrats control all of the committee processes and they also control the legislative process. So nothing's going to happen that Democrats don't want anyway. But AOC, that's never enough. She wants to just expel them all, get rid of them, because they did what? They happen to have a principled position in certain states and in certain instances where they believed there was potential election fraud, right? And felt as though that things just didn't seem right. So here's some proof, right? We're going to talk this through. So here's CNN's Pamela Brown interviewing the newly elected Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina. So Madison Cawthorn is the youngest member of the United States Congress. I believe he's either 25 years old or 26. You have to be 25 years old anyway to be in the House of Representatives, according to the United States Constitution, and nonetheless, he got elected. So he's the youngest member of Congress. He's a Republican from North Carolina. His name is Madison Cawthorn, and he is asked by Pamela Brown about his open letter to the United States Congress and the House of Representatives about how he wants to work across the aisle. And so listen to CNN's asymmetric questioning. Ideal. Here it is.
The letter says that you aim to, quote, rise above the partisan fray. Yet you are one of 138 Republicans who voted to decertify the election results. You actually did that even after the January 6 riots. So how does that help you reaching your goal of reaching across the aisle and working with the Biden administration?
Well, I'll tell you, as despicable as the events on January 6th were, it didn't actually affect my thought process on objecting to the election. You see, I wasn't objecting to President Biden himself, and I wasn't doing it on behalf of President Trump. I was doing it on behalf of the Constitution. I think in six key swing states, particularly in Wisconsin, you can see that the state legislature, who is the sole body that is supposed to dictate the law that is circumvents and is around all of our election laws, was circumvented. They subverted the state legislatures there, and I believe that's a constitutional infraction.
All Madison Cawthorn said was that he had an issue with what had happened in Madison, Wisconsin, and certain other states where there were some election irregularities. And in particular, his point was, what about those ballot drop boxes? Okay, so CNN's Pamela Brown asked, well, please give some specifics. You know, it's just not enough to just have some sort of generality. Give us some specifics. So Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina, the youngest member of Congress, does just that. And we have that clip, and here it is.
What are some specific examples that informed this bold decision, this audacious decision, even after the riots, to decertify the results? You must have seen some concrete evidence.
Well, Pam, the things that I was not objecting to the election on behalf of was things like Dominion voting machines changing ballots, or these U-Haul trucks pulling up filled with ballots for Joe Biden as president. The thing I was objecting for is things like, like I said, in the state of Wisconsin, particularly in the town of Madison, there was an appointed official in that town who actually went against the will of the state legislature and created ballot drop boxes, which is basically ballot harvesting that was happening in the parks.
But this was all litigated. You know that the Trump campaign litigated all of this, more than 60 cases, and they lost.
So CNN's Pamela Brown isn't the least bit interested in talking about the substantive part of the problem with the election. She wants to talk about the legal part, right? Well, they were litigated, and since they were litigated and Trump didn't win, therefore, well, by the way, that particular case wasn't litigated because the courts basically dismissed it. And you have to ask yourself the question, what about the actual principle of ballot harvesting and drop boxes? So let's talk that through for a minute, because this is exactly what Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina is talking about. So in Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin, of course, you have these drop boxes. They're not mailboxes run by the USPS. These are actually drop boxes that are separate, that might look like mailboxes somewhat and be built in the same or similar way, but they're owned by the election board. The election board puts them out across the city, and in theory, what's supposed to happen is when you finish filling out your mail-in ballot at home, you drive to a drop box, because, you know, after all, you might get COVID if you actually drive to the election board or vote on the day of the election. And so you drive to the drop box, and then you put your ballot inside the drop box. Except that that's generally not the full story. What actually ended up happening is that, yes, you had some individuals who dropped just their ballot, but you had many, many more who had their ballots harvested. In other words, people went door to door, knocked on their door and said, hey, you got a ballot? Great. Oh, you don't want to fill it out? Fine, I'll fill it out for you. And then I'll go ahead and drop it into the drop box. That's called ballot harvesting. You're harvesting ballots like you're harvesting corn. And you're doing it, and with ballots, of course, that's illegal, because the only ballot you should ever touch, ever, is yours, ever. And instead, you know, Madison decided that they're gonna run this election this way, and we know that that opens the door for cheating, because you interrupt the chain of custody of a ballot as soon as you have ballot drop boxes. That is what Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina was talking about. Except CNN's Pamela Brown has no interest whatsoever. No interest in talking about this, the substance of the issue. She's talking about the legal part. Well, because you failed in court, therefore there can't be any possible fraud in Madison, Wisconsin, or any other place for that matter where they had massive drop boxes. And so how is that related to AOC wants to expel everyone? It has everything to do with it, because AOC would talk to Chris Cuomo, and you heard those clips, and she's saying, well, every member of the House of Representatives who objected to the election, no matter how narrow they objected, to which states, or objected in general principle, they should be expelled from the House of Representatives, or they should be censured in some way, or they should be isolated and never allow any of their legislation to come out. And yet, you have another example of Pamela Brown of CNN asking Madison Cawthorn about the drop boxes, and she's not interested in talking through the problems that these drop boxes create. Instead, it's just hit jobs on members of Congress who happen to be Republicans. So you have to ask yourself the question, when these kinds of interviews happen, and by the way, kudos to Madison Cawthorn for going on CNN anyway, because obviously that takes a lot of guts, because right away it's always going to be a hit job. But you always have to ask yourself the question, at what point will the mainstream media ever really be interested in actually talking through in an intelligent way and providing a full scope of the possibilities that could happen? So if you're an objector about what happened in Madison, Wisconsin, and you really take a principled position that drop boxes are problematic, which they are, everybody knows it, then according to AOC, you need to be expelled. And that, of course, shows us that there's no interest in the Democrat Party of ever fixing this problem properly. They're going to just continue, if anything, pushing the envelope to make it worse and worse. And that's AOC, wants to expel everyone.